Brazil announced on Friday its return to the south of the South American nations after the signing of the presidential decree. In Israel, a car-ramming attack in central Tel Aviv caused the death of one man and leaves 5 people wounded. Rwanda marks the 29th anniversary of the genocide against the Tutsi ethnic group in a ceremony held at the National Memorial of the Gisothi in Kigali. Hello, welcome to From the South. I am your new anchor, Heidi Maurer from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news, so stay with us. The federal government announced on Friday the return of Brazil to the south of South American nations, UNASUR, in a decree signed by President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. After being published in the official Gazette of the Union, the provision will become effective as of May 6 in the 2019 defeated President Jair Bolsonaro communicated through social networks that Brazil would withdraw from the bloc, founded from a constitutive treaty signed by May 2008 by the government of Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Paraguay, Peru, Suriname, Uruguay, and Venezuela. Early this week, just like Brazil, Argentina also announced its return to the bloc. In past interventions, Lula has defined the strengthening of the South Common Market, Mercosur, the reorganization of UNASUR, and the improvement of the foreign relations policy between Latin American countries. On Friday, a U.S. court annulled the arrest warrant for former Peruvian President Alejandro Toledo, who could now be extradited to his country to answer a charge of alleged money laundering. The arrest warrant for former President Alejandro Toledo has been suspended for 14 days by a California judge. The measure comes after a court of appeals in the United States admitted on Thursday the request of Toledo's defense to delay the extradition for 2 weeks. Additionally, the former president's legal representative asked the U.S. justice system for Toledo extradition to take place in the San Jose court instead of San Francisco court. On Friday, U.S. President Joe Biden signed a warrant prolonging national emergency concerning sanctions against Russia over the situation in Ukraine. Through a communique, the U.S. mandatory noted that the activities of the Russian government abroad continue to pose an unusual threat to the security of the country, which is why it extended for the 1 year of the state of emergency related to the sanctions. After the start of the Russian special military operation in Ukraine in 2022, several countries led by Washington imposed sanctions on Moscow and sent tens of billions of dollars in military aid to Kyiv. However, the measures led to a rise in inflation, including electricity, fuel, and food prices, in both Europe and the United States. In Cuba, 2 workers were injured and 2 others remain trapped after an incident at the San Antonio Guiteras thermoelectric power plant in Matanzas province. The event occurred around 14 hours local time inside the chimney when a 7-meter-high partition, a wall made and a refractory turbine collapsed, striking 4 operators who were cleaning the chimney. It was learned that the 2 injured suffered important wounds in the lower extremities. Security and civil protection personnel are continuing with the rescue work to pull out the other operators. In this regard, the president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, on his social network Twitter, expressed that we are aware of the incident occurred at the CTA Guiteras, and we are also in constant communication with the authorities of Matanzas. Everything is in place for the rescue of workers. Our rescuers and firefighters are making a great effort. Once again, Cuba is with Matanzas. On Friday, the Colombian Geological Service reported that seismic activity continues and increases at the volcano Nevado del Ruiz. According to the most recent report of this institution, the increase in seismic activity is associated with the fracturing of the rock inside the volcanic edifice. On Thursday, 3,100 mini earthquakes and a stronger earthquake were recorded in the afternoon of the southwestern sector of the volcano, at depths between 2 and 4 kilometers closer to the crater. On Friday, about 1,500 earthquakes have been registered related to the movement of the fluid inside the volcanic conduit. So far, authorities have evacuated the communities located nearby the volcano. The Nevado del Ruiz last erupted on November 13, 1985, killing 23,000 people and prompting a major natural disaster. Now, 38 years later, locals are against between evacuating and caring for daily longings.
In 1985, the earth did not tremble, it shook. The ground did not shake like an earthquake, but it shook. If you leave things abandoned, the crops, the animals, when you come back there is nothing, because the thieves are looking to see what you leave behind, and they come to take that. They come to take the things, and then when you come back there is nothing.
And let's take a short break, but first remember you can follow us on TikTok account at teleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In France, on Friday, demonstrators put Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne in front of the hospital in Rhodes to demonstrate their opposition to the pension reform. While the head of the government was here to talk about health issues, David Guistot, Secretary General of the CGT Departmental Union of Aveyron, denounced a communication maneuver of the Prime Minister to make them move on to something other than the pension reform. At the demonstration, there were several trade union groups, some yellow vests, and high school students. During her visit to Aveyron, the Prime Minister insisted on her perfect alignment with the President of the Republic and called for an appeasement in the country in face of the pension crisis. The government and the unions await the decision of the Constitutional Council on Friday, April 14, on the conformity of the reform, which will be preceded the day before a new day of mobilization by the unions.
She comes here to talk about health when emergency services are threatened, maternity wards are threatened, laboratories are threatened. So coming here is a communication exercise to try to say, let's move on, let's talk about health. Except that on health, this government is also not up to the task because it does not provide the means. The desertification of the territories in terms of medical presence is impacted, and Aveyron is not spared. On the contrary, it is greatly impacted, and this puts entire populations in danger.
I am worn out by the working conditions, whether physical or psychological, because we are always asked for more with few resources.
In France, a strike at the Total Energies refinery in Donetsk to protest against the pension reform has been suspended after 6 weeks of conflict. In this context, Fabien Prive-Saint-Laine, Secretary of the CGT Total Energies, and Marine Gullitoni, Secretary of the Force of Year at the Donetsk refinery, have declared that this is not the end of the protest and that the strike will return.
It certainly doesn't mean that it's the end. It means that it's the beginning of another cycle. We have taken note of the obstinacy of the President of the Republic. We looked at other sectors of activity to see where the balance of power stood. And today the conclusion was made by the inter-union and by the striking workers that this movement was going to last a long time. So we're taking a fallback position today to recover some strength with the aim of calling for 2 days of mobilization on the 13th and the 14th.
It's not a funeral. We are not done at all. The proof is that we are calling against next week. And then in between, there are demonstrations with rallies, torchlight marches, things like that. And then any action which it can be roadblocks, it can be. There is a diversity of things and things that we don't know yet, and we are going to let the creativity of the workers, the disgruntled workers, express themselves too.
Also in France, the Yellow Vest movement demonstrated against the national government's shipment of arms to Ukraine. Activists of the Yellow Vest movement expressed their rejection of initiative, claiming that authorities will ask the people to reduce spending of the areas, while increasing the military budget by billions of euros to support the war industry, in addition to a war that does not take place on French territory. The Yellow Vest movement was founded in 2018 and led social protests against rising fuel prices, fiscal injustice, and loss of purchasing power. They also demanded the withdrawal of France reform and European Union and NATO. Turkey Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov held a joint press conference in Ankara after a bilateral meeting. Cavusoglu expressed his government's support for the removal of obstacles for the export of Russian grain and fertilizers and said that despite steps taken to ship Russia ammonia and fertilizer to African countries, the problem has not been completely solved.
We agree that obstacles to the export of Russian grain and fertilizer should be removed. There are efforts by Secretary General Antonio Guterres between the United Nations and the Russian Federation. As Turkey, we strongly support these efforts. Most recently in New York, we had the opportunity to discuss with Secretary General Guterres what we can do to meet Russia's expectations. A step was taken to send Russia ammonia and fertilizer to African countries via some Western countries such as the Netherlands, Estonia and Latvia. But of course, the problem has not been completely solved. We have to express this. We have to be fair here. When we say this, they say, do you support Russia? No, we are not saying this because we support Russia. We already import grain and fertilizer from Russia. The important thing is that for this agreement to continue, for the export of grain and fertilizer from Ukraine to continue, the existing agreement must be implemented. That's what we are saying.
On the other hand, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warns that Moscow could abandon the grain agreement with Ukraine if obstacles to Russia export persist. Lavrov pointed out that the Western responsibility of forcing Ukraine not to sit down at the negotiating table.
The Russian part of this package, which is provided for by a special memorandum between the United Nations and our country, is not being implemented at all. Both our Turkish friends and the initiator of this entire package, Mr. Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, addressed the relevant calls and demands to Western countries, but all in vain. The daily statements from Kyiv, Brussels, and Washington that on no account should the hostilities be stopped and the talks be started. This contradicts their demands for Russia to stop the war and sit down at the negotiating table. We understand that these are all dirty tricks.
teleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat. Dial 461 and enjoy all Latin American alternative broadcasts. One final short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu mobilized police and army reserves late Friday after one man was killed and 5 people were wounded in a car-ramming attack in central Tel Aviv. Israel's National Emergency Service reported that a man in his 30s have killed and 5 people were taken to the hospital after the attack, 3 with moderate injuries and 2 with minor injuries. It also added that all of them were tourists. A police spokesman told AFP that the terrorist was neutralized. On Friday morning, 2 British Israeli sisters, aged 16 and 20, were killed and their mother was seriously injured in a shooting in the occupied West Bank. The violence comes after Israeli riot police stormed at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in central Jerusalem early Wednesday, targeting Palestinian and Islam's third holy site. Rwanda marks the 29th anniversary of the genocide against the Tutsi ethnic group as in a ceremony held at the National Memorial on Gisothi in Kigali. As every year in April 7th, an official ceremony organized the Gisothi National Memorial marks at the beginning of the 100 days of commemoration. The genocide occurred between 7 April and 15 July 1994 during the Rwandan Civil War. During this period of around 1,000 dead members of the Tutsi minority ethnic group, as well as some moderate Hutu and Tutwa, were killed by armed Hutu militias. The most widely accepted scholarly estimate are around 500,000 to 662,000 Tutsi deaths. Referring to the Rwanda genocide ahead of the April 7 commemoration, the UN's Special Advisor of the Prevention of the Genocide said that the story shows that hate speech can be a precursor to the commission of atrocious crimes as has happened in the Holocaust and the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, and therefore should be avoided.
We gather to honor the continued sacrifice of survivors and remember all those we lost during the genocide against the Tutsi. But Rwandans, I thank all of you for refusing to be defined by this tragic history. We cannot, however, ignore the fact that things like violence and hate speech persist not so far away from here.
More than 14,000 migrants were intercepted in the first 3 months of the year in Tunisia while trying to reach European coast in unsafe boats. The Coast Guard foiled more than 500 irregular migration attempts and intercepted or rescued 14,400 people, of which only 1,200 were Tunisian citizens. Specialists say the increase of arrivals of the Sub-Saharan migrants follow statements by the Tunisia President Kais Saied about the plot to change the country's demography and Arab-Muslim identity. In recent weeks, nearly 100 people, all of them from Sub-Saharan Africa, have died in severe shipwrecks, and at least 60 are unknown destinations. The Iranian embassy in Syria distributed humanitarian aid to refugee and Palestinian resistance forces in the country during Ramadan. The Iranian embassy made the delivery of basic foodstuffs and essential goods for the Al-Yarmouk camp. This action seeks to soften the impact of the sanctions imposed on Damascus, which have caused serious difficulties and negatively affected the daily lives of the Palestinian refugees. The embassy pointed out that they hope to send a message of the solidarity with the Palestinian people. At least 21 people, including 6 children, have died in Somalia's flash flooding over last week, according to the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. On Friday, the UN Humanitarian Agency reported that nearly 100,000 people have been affected by the heavy rains and flash floods that hit the area in the Barhir district of the southern Jeddah region. The flooded region is near Ethiopia, which has been hit by the heavy rains that are causing water levels to rise in the Shabelle and Juba rivers. In this context, authorities reported destroyed facilities, while more than 100,000 hectares of farmland have been swamped, while communities near rivers continue to at risk. Before the flash flood, the country was going through 5 seasons of severe drought that left over 8 million people in need of humanitarian aid and displaced more than 1.4 million. A military tribunal of the Democratic Republic of the Congo sentenced 6 men to life in prison on Friday for murdering Italian ambassador in 2021. The defendants, who were arrested in January 22, denied any wrongdoing and said their initial confessions were extracted through torture. The lawyers also argued that the prosecution had failed to offer evidence in support of the murder charge and pushed for the acquittal. Public prosecutors had originally thought the death penalty for the 6 accused, calling them members of the criminal gang. 5 of men are being held in prison in Kinshasa, while the others is on the run. The lawyers for the 6 Congolese men say they could appeal the life terms. The murdered Italian ambassador Luca Attanasio was shot dead on February 22, 2021, when a United Nations convoy was ambushed in the country's eastern region. And we have come to the end of Since You Brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I am Heidi Maurel. Thank you for watching.